Welcome to the VBAC Homebirth Stories podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Winning, founder of the Motherhood Circle and creator of the Journey into Motherhood program. I'm a mother of two and have had two unplanned and unneeded C-sections and am planning my first home and vaginal birth. My own journey has sparked a deep passion to support women to find their own voice and strength to create the pregnancy, birth and motherhood experience you desire. This podcast is for women wanting to learn more about VBACs, especially home births, and for professionals who want to learn more about how to support VBAC home birthing women. Inside, we're going to share women's stories from surgical birth to achieving their vaginal home birth after cesarean. Now let's get started. Hi Aimee, thank you so much for coming on today. I've been really excited for you to share your stories. We've been in contact for a little while actually, a couple of years actually. In the birth world. So it's really nice to actually catch up with you like this and finally get to hear your birth story. So thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thanks, Ashley. It's really a pleasure to be able to share my birth stories with you and with your hearers, your viewers. I don't know what it's called.
Yeah, especially because you're so you're such a home birth advocate as well.
Absolutely.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a doula and a home birth activist or advocate. I am the coordinator of Homebirth New South Wales and co-coordinator of Home Birth Consortium Australia and Homebirth Australia. And I sit on the committee with Maternity Choices Australia and Doula Network Australia as well. So I'm really quite heavily involved in birth advocacy, but particularly home birth is where my passion lies because, I've given birth at home. I know that it's the gold standard of care and I just adore it.
So it's really lovely to have you on here to share your very own home births as well. Let us know a little bit about you personally as well.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a doula. My background was actually that I was a lecturer and researcher in plant physiology. I did my doctorate after during my first pregnancy and finished my doctorate just before my second pregnancy or my second baby was born. And then after his birth, I just realized how incredible birth can be. I mean, I already knew it was pretty amazing, but actually experiencing home birth was next level. And so my passion just changed a little bit. I started, I suppose, dabbling in the birth world. So I got involved with what was then known as Home Birth Access Sydney, but is now Home Birth New South Wales, as the editor of Birthings magazine. And I started studying to become a breastfeeding counsellor with the Australian Breastfeeding Association. And then once I finished that study, I began doing my studies to become a doula. And I just really got basically pulled into the birth world. And it was really beautiful, actually. I just followed my nose and it's led me here. And so recently I was asked to co-coordinate Home Birth Australia, and our president of Home Birth New South Wales was resigning. And so I nominated for that, and now the rest is history. Now I'm here. So that's it. And personally, I have three beautiful children. All of them were planned home births, and I live with them and my husband, our dog, our chooks and our bird in the beautiful Blue Mountains.
Oh, lovely. Thanks for sharing that about you, because I didn't know anything about that. And it's so nice to hear the story of how, it happened and, where you were before and now where you are now as a mother and, advocate for women birthing. It's a wonderful journey that you've been on.
Yeah, it's been absolutely incredible. And I'm very grateful that I've had a lot of support to get where I am now. So
let's start off with your first pregnancy, because you mentioned that you were planning a home birth with your first. So let's start from there and see where we end up.
Yeah, sure. So my very first pregnancy, actually, I started speaking with one of my friends who had 3 children at the time. She now has 7, and all of them were homeborn. And I remember saying to her that I thought she was a little bit crazy for for deciding to do that, actually. But she basically said, look, just read this book. And she gave me Gentle Birth, Gentle Mothering by Sarah Buckley. And I started reading it and couldn't stop. And I just basically got sucked into the birth, into the birth world, but just, I really adored all of this information. And I'm a researcher. So once I started reading about it, I just didn't stop. And I just essentially I settled on, with all of my research, it was really well backed, that if I wanted a natural birth, which is what I wanted, I would have a much better chance of achieving that at home with a midwife in attendance. And so I started planning a home birth. And I rang around and asked a couple of different midwives whether they would support me, and ended up meeting with one of them who I absolutely adore. And she then went on to support me in that pregnancy and every pregnancy since. Sadly, I ended up miscarrying that baby at around 12 weeks, but we had already booked Jo in, and so we just continued with our plans with her. And so once I did conceive again, I was very distraught by that situation, and it took us a while before we would try again. And then when we did, I rang Jo, and she was totally elated, as was I, that we were pregnant again, and so we just continued on from there. And yeah, so then I ended up having another bleed with that bub, and around 9 weeks had a really large bleed, and we thought I might have been miscarrying. And then after doing a lot of reading, I thought, no, I think it's actually a subchorionic hematoma. And so the support I received from my midwife around that time was just so valuable and wonderful. And going through the hospital system for my previous miscarriage, because the baby didn't come away entirely, so I had what was called retained products of conception, which is just ludicrous. But I had to stay in the hospital overnight. And although the care there was fantastic, it really reiterated to me that that was not where I wanted to be spending my time with a new baby. And it wasn't where I wanted to birth my children. So, we just kept on going with the bleed. It just reiterated to me that, the care that I was receiving was really incredible. We went and had a scan. Bub was actually there and beautiful. It was the first time we'd seen a heartbeat on an ultrasound, and it was the most incredible feeling ever.
Yeah, but it was.
Yeah, it was just, I burst into tears, and my hubby teared up, and it was wonderful. And then I had a really smooth pregnancy for the rest of that pregnancy. It was just blissful. I was sure she was a girl. Right from the beginning, I was telling my husband it was a girl, and planning for it to be. And when we just had a gorgeous pregnancy experience with our private midwife supporting us throughout that. So, and then we got to about around 35 and a half weeks, and I went on maternity leave and started, nesting and exercising and doing all of these things that I hadn't had time to do. And I went for a really, really long swim. And when I got out, I felt a bit dizzy. And I remember coming home and saying to my husband, I think I overdid it. I'm just going to have a bit of a rest. And that the next day, I lost some of my mucus plug. And because I was still pre-36 weeks, I was like, no, this can't be happening. I'm not going to have my home birth if this doesn't happen, if it happens now. And so I was obviously in touch with my midwife and explaining what was going on. And she said, look, just relax and try and lie down as much as you can. And we'll see where it goes. And over the coming days, I started having fairly regular Braxton Hicks, really. Like they weren't painful, but they were semi-regular. And the whole time I was just saying, like, stay in there, baby. I don't want you to come yet. Speaking to her and just really trying to connect in and tell her to stay. And then at 36 plus 3, the night of that, I was still going, still pregnant, thankfully, and my dog started acting really strange. And I took a video of it being like, what is up with her? Like, I don't understand. She was 14 years old at the time. And so I'd just never seen that sort of behavior from her. Anyway, I went to bed thinking not much of it, but then woke up at 2 a.m. to gushing blood. And so, I rang my midwife and explained what was happening. And she said, look, I would suggest that you go and get it checked out, go to your hospital that we booked into, in order to book into the continuity with the OB, and I knew who would be there. But he had to be called in. So anyway, we went to the hospital. I couldn't feel baby moving, so I was absolutely terrified that something had gone wrong, and she wasn't going to make it. And then when we got to the hospital, they did a CTG and found Bub's heartbeat, and she started kicking around like crazy. She didn't really like ultrasounds or the Doppler or anything. And so I took that off once I'd gotten confirmation, she was still kicking around in there until the obstetrician came in, which was about 15 minutes later. He came in, did an ultrasound, and then just turned really white, and said, oh, your placenta is sitting between the baby's head and your cervix, which now I recognize, that's not actually possible, given it wasn't there. Like, I would have had to have entirely abrupted for it to be in that place, but it also makes sense as to why he was really freaking out.
So the doctor went white as a sheet, white as a ghost when he was telling you this. So they saw a scan.
Yeah.
And he saw your placenta on your cervix and your baby's head on top.
Yeah. And he was just like, oh, this is really a bad situation. He thought that I might have had vasa previa and started asking me all of these questions about my previous scans. And I said, look, that hasn't been diagnosed. My placenta was away from the cervix. I was very aware of all of this because I'd researched it a lot. But I had also, when I had the subchorionic hematoma, I had read that in some instances, very rarely, the placenta becomes compromised by the hematoma, so it doesn't attach as solidly as it needs to be attached, essentially. And so you're at slightly higher risk of a placental abruption. And so I had read about this, and when he started talking about, oh, your placenta has come away, I said, oh, I've had a placental abruption. And he said, yeah, and he was really surprised that I knew what that was. But anyway, it made it easier to relay, what information he needed to get across to me and what I needed to get across to him. And so he started making the calls to get people in. He said, you don't really have an option, given that the baby looks like it's sitting on top of your placenta. If the placenta was to be born first, obviously that would be pretty catastrophic. So the only option is a cesarean. And I rang my midwife and spoke through it with her. And we agreed that, that was the safest way for this baby to be born. And so he went and made the calls and got the paperwork. And I said to him, I will only sign this paperwork if you promise that I can have my baby skin to skin and breastfeed in recovery. And I want my husband there the whole time. And he said to me, he was a very cocky obstetrician. He said to me, I've never lost a mother or baby, and I'm not about to let you be the first. And I said, well, that's fine, but I'm not signing until you agree to that. And he did. So we signed, and in we went for the procedure. And it was actually really a fairly positive experience, really. Like, it wasn't as scary as I was expecting it to be. I was hugging the midwife while they put the spinal in, and I'd been sort of reading about hypnobirthing and particularly the breathing that you can use to calm yourself down. And so I was using that sort of birth breathing while they put the spinal in, and it was really surprising to me how effective that was. So so we got that sorted, and then once they had the spinal sort of all organized and set up, I laid back on the bed, and my hubby was there with me, and we just sort of laid back. I had asked to have my placenta kept, so that was one aspect that I had double checked that they were going to do. And I had also asked if I could see my baby be born, but they had said that, because of the emergency situation of it, although it didn't feel overly emergent at the time, the way that it was quite a extended period of time that I was waiting really to go into surgery, because all the anaesthetists and everyone had to be called in. But because of how emergent it was, they were like, we can't really do that. And they hadn't ever offered it to any other woman prior to that, which was a bit of a bummer. But I said, the main thing I wanted was skin to skin. Anyway, so I was laying there, and I remember saying to my husband, oh, she's been born. I could feel the change in pressure after I'd been lying there for a while. And I said, oh, she's here. And he looked around the sheet and was like, oh yeah, she is. And then, she started screaming, and they brought her over. They wrapped her and put her on my chest. And I said to my husband, get the blankets off. I want her skin to skin. And so he did that for me. And then I just sort of gazed into her eyes and was like, oh my gosh, hello, my baby. And I said, I'll never leave you again. I'll never let you go. And she pretty much remained skin to skin with me for the next 18 months of her life.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah. And then we went into recovery, and they allowed me to have hubby and my baby with me, and we tried to breastfeed in there. She was a little bit early, so she found it quite difficult to latch. And in the end, the only way that we could get her to latch was with a nipple shield, which she fed for 2.5 years using a nipple shield. So she did really well, really. And my midwife came and joined us in recovery, and I just remember her face as she was hammering at the doors to come in, and feeling so much more calm once she was there. Like, okay, we've got someone who knows this system and can actually help support us. Because I don't believe that all midwives and obstetricians are out to get us or anything like that. But I just felt like I wanted someone who I knew and who could advocate for me if I needed it. And
that makes sense. Wanting a friend, wanting continuity of care, rather than being with strangers, makes total sense.
Absolutely. And so that made a huge difference once she got there. And in the hospital, I remained there. I had Willow on the morning of, on a Wednesday. It was at 5:30 in the morning, and then I ended up discharging myself against medical advice on the Friday, because I found one of the midwives feeding my baby formula without my consent. And I can, now I reflect, I can understand why they were concerned. My milk hadn't come in because I'd had a cesarean just a couple of days prior.
But it's normal for milk not to come in.
Exactly.
In a day. It takes at least 2 to 5 days for most.
Yeah, exactly.
Women.
And it was just ludicrous, really, that they were expecting so much of my body. And also my baby wasn't latching well. So every feed that I had, they expected me to be watched by a midwife, not my own midwife, unfortunately, but a hospital midwife that was there. And that pressure was just, it was just awful. And they were, doing heel prick tests on her every 3 hours because she was classed as premature, even though she was only born 3 days before 37 weeks. So all of this was just really quiet. It was really full on, and it wasn't going to promote my milk coming in. There was absolutely no way my milk would have come in while I was in that situation. And so I just said, look, I'm discharging myself. And I went home on the proviso that we would come back for a weigh-in a couple of days later. And yeah, so I went home, and the moment I stepped through my front door, my breast started dripping with milk.
Oh,
Yeah.
You felt safe and at home.
Exactly. And so from then on, we just really didn't look back. She started, stacking on the weight. We went back for the weigh-in with our fingers and toes crossed that she would be okay, because they had actually threatened if we didn't come back, they would call docs, but also if she hadn't gained enough weight, they would intubate her. And all of this, it was just to get trying to force me to agree to things that I wasn't comfortable doing. I didn't want to give my baby formula, and I was really pressured to do that.
It's horrible, Aimee. It actually is horrible. I would be horrified if someone took my baby and fed them formula against my wishes. It was actually one of my biggest fears, which is why I never let her ever be taken away from my sight. And it brings up so many feelings for me hearing your story.
Yeah, it was really, I felt very violated and just like, no, I can't, because I just went to the toilet. I had gotten up to go to the toilet and came back, and she was feeding her formula. And it was just, that was just the end of the road for me with that hospital. And I had lost all trust that I would have had in anybody that was providing my care there. So, I mean, yeah, it was a really, the cesarean itself was not traumatic, but the aftercare, the breastfeeding relationship, I felt they really did try to derail it entirely. Or, even if that wasn't their plan, that's what would have happened had I not had adequate support. And, I did use donor milk for a couple of days, and the only way I would have sourced that is if I had a friend who knew how to get it. And thankfully I had a doula with me that was also a breastfeeding counsellor, and she knew some mums that were able to donate milk for me. So yeah, it was really quite brutal, and I've never quite been able to come to terms with that my daughter complained. Yeah, nothing came of it, of course, but
No.
it's there. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Oh God, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm glad that your cesarean, was very less. I had a similar experience where it wasn't as bad as I thought. So I'm glad that you had a similar experience, because I know so many people have differing experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I really went in with this idea that cesarean was going to be an absolutely brutal, horrific way to birth a baby. And I was terrified of having a spinal. I'm fine with needles, but the idea of something going into my spine like that really scared me. And I had never had an operation. I had never been put under. I hadn't had any anesthetic for anything ever before. So I was really quite concerned about how I would respond to that. But no, it went really well. And although the cesarean itself was good, and then the aftercare wasn't so great, my recovery felt like it took a really long time. Like I was a good 9 months still having pain around my incision, and what I think was coming from adhesions from my scar. And it was like I couldn't exercise without it being somewhat painful. It just wasn't an optimal situation, really. So, yeah, as much as I didn't find the cesarean itself traumatic, I would not go through it again if I didn't have to.
So when you then went on to plan another baby, how long was that process, and share a little bit about that story for us?
Yeah, so when Willow was about 1 year old, we started sort of dreaming about having another bub, and we just started trying. We were like, it won't happen straight away. And, 6 months passed, and then a year passed, and still nothing. And I started wondering about secondary infertility from the cesarean. And I started attending lots of different alternative therapies. So I was seeing an acupuncturist, a myoabdominal masseuse, a kinesiologist, a chiropractor, like pretty much everyone, naturopath, everyone that I thought might be able to help me to conceive a baby, I had gone to see. And in the meantime, I'd had a lot of blood tests and things to see, why my placental abruption happened. And really, the outcome of that was just that we have no freaking idea why it happened. So I didn't have the knowledge about, how I could prevent that from happening again. And that was something that really affected me throughout trying to conceive another pregnancy. And I think it affected my husband in terms of wanting another baby, because he was quite concerned that, that could happen again. And he wasn't necessarily concerned for a baby we hadn't yet met, but he was really quite terrified he'd lose me. So yeah, it wasn't a fantastic start in that way, but we tried for about a year, and then I went, that this just isn't happening. And so I abandoned all of the, actually no, first I started asking my daughter, because she was still breastfeeding at this point. So she was about 2, and I remember saying to her, like, do you want a baby brother or a sister? And she said, yes. And I said, I don't know if I can keep breastfeeding you and conceive a baby. So the way I described that was, I don't know if you can keep having booby and if mummy can have a baby at the same time. So we might have to wait till you're finished having booby. And she basically said to me that she would have less. She said, I'll just have 2 boobies. I was like, okay, well, we can try that. And so we tried that for the next 6 or so months, and I did conceive a baby. In fact, I conceived twice, but I lost both of those babies very early, around the 5 or 6 week mark. And I got to the point where, I was just so disheartened, and I just went, I'm not going to keep trying. Like, it's just too much. I'll wait until she's ready to totally wean, and then we'll try one last time and see what happens. And so I abandoned all of the various therapies I was doing. And actually my daughter she's incredibly intuitive. And she had said to me when I conceived my second baby, she had said, there's a baby in your her. And I was like, no, I don't think so. Not yet. We're trying, but I don't think so yet. And she said, no, there's a baby in your tummy. And when I took a pregnancy test, lo and behold, I was actually pregnant. And so she was just really connected in. And she also said to me with that pregnancy, a couple of weeks after she told me I was pregnant, she said, this baby can't stay. And I remember wondering what on earth she was talking about, and how do you have this knowledge? And it really creeped me out. And then, very soon after that, I started miscarrying. And so then, when I fell pregnant the 3rd time, and I had said, I'm not, I said to her, we're not going to try again until you have no more boobies, because I think maybe I just can't right now. And she said, I'll have no more boobies. She wanted a baby brother or sister. She really wanted a baby sister. I didn't deliver on that, unfortunately. But yeah, she said that she wanted a baby. And so she stopped feeding, and I fell pregnant very soon after that. And she again told me that I was pregnant. And again, she was right. And then I said to her, do you think this baby will stay? And she said, oh, I don't know yet. And so we just sort of, we just had to wait and see. And it was really incredible how in tune she was with my body and with this baby. It was just amazing. And so, the pregnancy progressed pretty well. At about 9 weeks, I ended up so anxiety ridden that I asked my midwife if I could go and get an ultrasound, because I just really wanted to know, is there a baby in there? Is this actually happening? And, she was more than happy to oblige and said, with the amount of stress and anxiety, like, that's probably worse for the baby than any ultrasound would be. So just go and have one. And so that's what we did. And we saw little Hamish kicking around in there. And for each of my babies, I've never found out like what sex they were during the 20-week scan or anything. I just always knew intuitively what they were. And so I was sure my daughter was was a girl, and then I was sure that Hamish was a boy. And so from then on, my daughter named Hamish Chicken Patty Cake. That was my pregnancy's name.
So cute.
Yeah. And yeah, Chicken Patty Cake just continued to grow beautifully, and we had no dramas with the rest of the pregnancy. Willow did at some point tell me that the baby didn't like tomatoes, and I ended up having tomatoes that night and ended up violently ill, and couldn't eat tomatoes from then on. So there's another little weird intuitive thing that she did.
Special.
Yeah, it was. And so the pregnancy continued blissfully well. I got to 36 weeks and was quite nervous about, whether the abruption was going to happen again, but I had no signs or symptoms of it, and I was just really happy to still be pregnant. And then 37 weeks rolled around, and then 38 and 39, and I had always said, like, if I could get to 40 weeks, that's my goal. Like, I'd love to just be able to get to 40 weeks. And I made it there. And on that day, I remember saying to my husband, oh, this baby is so comfy. Like, I don't reckon he's going to come out for a fair while. He's just really happy in there, and I'm so comfortable. Like, I had no complaints whatsoever. I was just really, really enjoying the beauty of being pregnant at that point. And he was like, oh, okay, well, we'll wait and see. And then 2 hours later, my waters broke.
Did you get a scan or anything? Like, did you have any concerns that you felt like you needed to get a scan in your late pregnancy?
So I didn't in late pregnancy. I did at the 20-week point, I did have a morphology scan, and I've done that with each of my children just because when I was planning a home birth, I wanted the information it provided mainly around placental placement. I wanted to know that my placenta wasn't over my cervix, basically. And so I did have that scan. And for his pregnancy, absolutely nothing was noted on that scan. He was perfect as far as that showed. And yeah, turns out he was just as it saw.
And you were exactly 40 weeks or around?
Was.
Yeah, and then your waters broke?
Yeah, and so I was just like having a lie down on the lounge, which I never do. I don't think I've done that since either, actually. But I don't know, my body was just telling me to rest. And I woke up at about, I don't know, it would have been around 10, and like felt a pop in my tummy and just was like, I know what that is, and ran to the kitchen. And there was just, my waters just went all over the floor. And I was saying to my husband, oh, my waters just broke, and look, it's clear, and there's flecks of vernix, and that was on my baby. And I got super excited. And, he was like, oh, this is fantastic. All right, I'll go get a towel, and like did all the practical things. And we cleaned it up, and I rang my midwife and let her know. And we had a discussion about, the various ways that we would minimize the chances of, any sort of infection in case I was holding on for a while after my waters broke. Because that was a fear I had actually had during pregnancy, was that my waters would break, but I wouldn't go into labor, and then I'd need to be induced or something like that. And so we had a discussion around that, and we agreed. I just, disinfect the toilet, don't have any penetrative sex, like don't have a bath, just all of the things, just keep hands and things out of your vagina. But then within sort of a couple of hours, I had started getting the first niggles anyway. And so we had decided to just go on with our day as usual. We went to the farmer's market and sort of walked around there, bought all of the produce we would normally buy, and we saw a couple of friends up there and had a chat with them. One of them was a school friend, and he said to me, oh, you're really pregnant. Like, how long till you have the baby? And I was like, oh, I don't know, being very sheepish, thinking, well, probably today. And I saw a fellow home birth mum there as well. And it was just really a lovely, relaxed morning. And then we came home, loaded all the shopping into the fridge and stuff. And then I noticed that I was starting to have like fairly regular, what felt like Braxton Hicks to me, they weren't overly painful or anything, but yeah, they were coming fairly regularly every, 7 or so minutes. And so I started setting up my birth space. And by the time I'd finished setting up my birth space, they were closer together, like maybe 4 or 5 minutes. And I ended up ringing my midwife and letting her know. And she was like, okay, well, let me know when you need me to come. Like, I'm happy to come now. And I said, no, I don't think it is all that necessary right now. Because they were still not, super regular, and they weren't painful. But then very soon after that, I started sort of moaning through them and rocking over a fit ball and starting to feel nauseous. And so I said to my husband, I'm just going to message our doula and get her to come, because she was going to come and look after my daughter. I wanted my daughter present for the birth. And so I tried to message her, and I remember looking at my phone and looking at the time, and it was like maybe like 12:30 or maybe 1 o'clock actually. And then I was rocking, and the next time I looked back at my phone trying to send this message, it was 1:30. And I said to my husband, can you just get her here? Like, I need you with me, and I can't have you distracted with Willow, and I just want that support now. And so he called her, and then he called my midwife, and she listened to me through a few contractions, and she was like, yeah, I'm going to come up. And once I got the confirmation that she was on her way, I decided it was time to get into the bath, and that I was just going to hole myself up there until the baby came. And so, so I got in the bath and, was sort of wading around in like 1 centimetre of water for a little bit while it filled, because I just wanted to be in that space really. And I remember once it had filled, looking up and seeing my doula had arrived and saying hi to her. And then my daughter came in a couple of times to give me sips of water and give me a hug or a kiss. And then I saw my midwife, and I remember once I saw my midwife, I was like, okay, this is happening. Like, I could really relax into it and just release. I knew that now my whole team was there, and it just gave me an instant sense of calm. And so, I just kept laboring. At one point I said, this isn't happening fast enough. And I got out of the pool in a huff and got on my bed and was rocking back and forth on the fitball. And I remember my midwife looking at me like, I'm unsure why you're doing this, but that's fine. But it was like, for what reason are you getting out? Because it seems like it's all going beautifully well. And then I got back in the pool or the bath, and then quite soon after that I started having like this really strange downward pressure, and I felt like I had to stand up during the contractions, but then I'd sort of slump down in a heap and fall asleep between them. So I was standing and sitting each time, and my husband was putting heat packs on my back and my front and just supporting me through that really beautifully. And, Willow came in a couple of times to check on what I was doing and to comment that I was making some really strange noises, which we'd prepared her for. We'd watched lots of birth videos and read lots of home birth books and stuff. So she knew that I was going to make funny noises and things. And then, then suddenly I couldn't do those contractions standing up with both my legs on the ground. I needed one leg elevated. And so I was putting my foot on the side of the bath and like swaying side to side, and I could feel my pelvis like opening. It's a really strange experience and hard to describe, but I could feel like the baby was actually sort of coming down into it. And so I had some contractions like that, and then soon after that, actually, a little bit of blood started dripping out. And I remember my doula saw it. It was just bloody mucus. And she went and grabbed my midwife and said, this has happened. And so my midwife checked the baby and everything seemed fine. And at this point, I hadn't had any vaginal exams or anything. And she said to me, would you be okay with having a check just so that we can make sure that this isn't something to be worried about? Because if you're in early labor and you're bleeding, it's not a great situation to have. Whereas if you're in like quite advanced labor, it can be quite normal to have bloody mucus coming away. And so she asked that she check, and I was like, yeah, that's totally fine. And so she checked, and I remember saying, I don't want to know, like, don't tell me. And she was like, okay, that's fine. And then later on, I was like, actually tell me, I want to know. And she said, you're 8 centimeters. And I was expecting her to say like 4 centimeters or something. And so hearing that, I was so relieved, because I had thought, I had hours longer to go. My mum had been in labour with me for 36 hours. So I thought it was just going to be the same as what she had with her first labour. And because I'd never experienced a contraction up until this point, I really expected it would just be really long. So it was, a huge relief. So I got back into the bath, and then very soon after that, I started, having those thoughts where I was like, I can't do this anymore. You need to take me to the hospital. I remember looking at my husband, because he was the weakest link, and saying, you need to take me to the hospital. And he's looking at my midwife like, what do I say? And then, my midwife saying, well, you can go, but what will you do if we go there? And I said, I'll get an epidural. And she's like, is that what you want? I said, yes, I just want the pain to stop. And she was like, okay, well, if you would like to do that, let's go and pack a bag. And of course, I was not at all interested in packing a bag. So I was like, I'll just stay here for a little bit longer. And then the next contraction came, and I started saying I wanted to go home. And my midwife was like, well, you are at home. And then the next contraction came, and I started getting pushy towards the end of it. And that was literally my whole transition. It was all of maybe 5 minutes. And so, I started sort of getting those really grunty bearing down urges towards the end of the contraction. And in my mind, I remember thinking, oh, wow, I'm starting to feel like I need to push. But I hadn't sort of articulated that. And my midwife had obviously recognized what was happening. And then once the urge to like push and that grunty feeling, it came on like for more and more of each contraction as time progressed, until it felt like, the whole contraction was me grunting and bearing down. And I remember saying to my midwife, I'm pushing. And she was like, yep, I know, you've been doing that for a little while now. And, it just kept going. And then for some reason, I had had enough. And I said to her, well, how long is this going to take? How much longer? And she said, I don't know, maybe check inside and see whether you can feel anything. And I checked and couldn't feel anything. And I remember wailing, oh, this is going to be forever. I can't do it anymore. I don't want to do it anymore. And I had a bit of a breakdown at that moment. And she really sort of leveled with me and said, we're just going to take it one at a time. And let's just do this one, just this one. And so we did just that one, and we did just the next one and the next one too. And my husband sort of really was very present and eyeballing me each time and holding me and reassuring me that, we're just doing this one. And then for some reason I decided I'm going to check again. And so I checked, and this time I could actually feel something hard. And elated, I sort of yelled at my midwife, I can feel his head, I can feel something. And she was like, all right, that's fantastic. And then each contraction after that, I was getting that feedback of he's coming closer. I would show to her on my finger how far in he was. And, it was all the way, and then, 2 knuckles, and then 1 knuckle, and then just inside. Each time it was getting closer and closer. And then he started crowning. And I remember thinking that, that wasn't, I didn't feel that sort of ring of fire that people talk about. I just felt like a really big, stretchy feeling like, wow, this is the biggest I'm ever going to be. This is like, I'm so big, is what I kept thinking. And, I sort of was trying to pant through those contractions. And I really only had one where he was crowning until his head sort of popped out, where I was going, ha, ha, ha. But my midwife was helping me to do the ha-haing between. And then all of a sudden I just went, no, I'm not doing this anymore, and gave one almighty push, and his whole head popped out. And in hindsight, I probably shouldn't have done that. But I couldn't not. It was just at that point where I felt so overwhelmed with that feeling that I just had to get his head out. And so I did that, and my midwife tried to check on his heartbeat and she couldn't find it. And she said to me, in the next contraction, I'd really like to try and get him out. So like, can you give a big push? And I said, he's actually fine. He's pulsing. And in hindsight, that sounds really very strange to say. But then once he sort of, the next contraction came and I pushed and he came out, his shoulders came out and the cord was wrapped around his neck. So that pulsing that I was feeling was actually his cord pulsing. I thought that was really quite special.
You could feel that.
Yeah. And
it's interesting that I wouldn't have thought she would have been able to check his heartbeat that, when he's coming out.
Yeah, so it was just, she did say to me, it's quite likely that his heart is, his chest is in your pelvis, and so I won't be able to pick anything up. But she wanted to check and try, and because she couldn't get anything, and I think that the time between my contractions really sort of spaced out at that point. Like once his head was out, it felt like it was a really long time, and so I think maybe she was just feeling like, okay, well, we need to move it along a little bit. And yeah, the next contraction, he came out, shoulders and everything, and everything was fine. He sort of shot out across the pool or the bath, and my midwife caught him and passed him over to me. And, I just remember thinking, oh my God, like I actually just pushed a baby out of my vagina and I'm holding this baby and he's here, and oh my God. And I had felt as I lifted him up that, it didn't feel quite the same as lifting my daughter up. He had some extra stuff down there, but I hadn't mentioned anything to anyone at that point because he was still taking a little bit of time to come into his body. And so we waited for a while, and he was just sort of gasping and having a bit of trouble. And so my midwife asked me, are you okay if I suction him? And I said, look, yeah, like he was really struggling. And so she suctioned him, and he came good straight after that, let out a mighty bellow. And from then on, he was absolutely fine. He didn't need any bagged air or anything like that. And yeah, he was just beautiful and pinked up beautifully well, and gave him lots of cuddles and fed him in the bath. And then after a little while, and my daughter was totally elated. She was like squealing, oh, we have a baby.
No.
And then she said, is it a girl? And I said, no, darling, it's a boy. And I remember her having like maybe a second of very disappointed look. And then she was like, but it's a baby. And I was like, yeah, it is a baby. And so, yeah, she came around and was giving him lots of kisses and stuff. And then, I tend to bleed quite a bit with my births. It seems that that's just a trend and it's normal for me. So there was a bit of blood in the bath, and my midwife said, look, I would feel more comfortable if you would jump out of the bath. Are you okay doing that? And I was like, yeah, that's fine. So we got on the bed, and I just sat on some blueies, and the bleeding was all just coming from a tear that I had sustained. It wasn't coming from anywhere else. So that was a positive. And my placenta came away fairly easily about 45 minutes after he was born. And then, yeah, we just kept feeding and snuggling. My midwife, once the placenta was born, she advised me that I had sustained a 2nd-degree tear, unfortunately. But she was able to stitch it up on my bed. We didn't need to go anywhere. And she was extremely gentle and really did a fantastic job. And, it was really like I got to hold my baby and just continue feeding throughout. It wasn't a big deal. And then once that had all been sorted, we separated Hamish from his placenta. We used some candles and did cord burning. And it was incredibly beautiful how slowly that sort of released him from his placenta, and he wasn't upset at all. And it was just a really lovely way to transition through that. But what ended up happening, even though the cord popped and, it all seemed to seal quite well, it hadn't sealed entirely. And so we ended up needing to use a cord tie as well, which was totally fine because I'd gotten one of them as well. So he ended up with a cord tie with a little blackened stump as well, which was quite cute. And then from then on, we just kept feeding. His feeding was really quite brutal. He had a tongue tie, a quite significant one, and we ended up getting it revised, and it didn't fix all of the problems, but it fixed the recurrent mastitis I was having. But then I had a galactocele and all sorts of other stuff going on with his breastfeeding. So his birth was incredibly beautiful, as was his pregnancy, but the breastfeeding journey was really hard. But it wasn't derailed at all like what I felt Willow's was. It was just, we were finding it hard to learn the steps of this breastfeeding dance, and it took us a little while to really settle into it. But yeah, that was his birth, and he kept feeding right up until my next pregnancy, it's been really beautiful actually. Yeah.
And then, so with your next pregnancy, did you guys make a conscious decision to conceive, or was it a surprise?
So this one was a big surprise. So I hadn't, because I hadn't been able to fall pregnant with my son, and we had been trying for so long, I actually quite naively thought that it would be the same situation. So I was like, I can't fall pregnant while I'm breastfeeding. It's fine. And at around, when Hamish was just over 18 months, sort of midway between 18 months and 2 years, he was still feeding frequently overnight, and all of a sudden I was just feeling rotten. And I remember, because I've got some intolerance issues, so I remember thinking I just must have eaten something wrong. But it was spanning for days and days and days that I was feeling nauseous and just like not myself. And I started getting little nosebleeds, which I often get when I'm pregnant, and headaches, which I also get when I'm pregnant. And but still I wasn't putting it down to anything because I can't fall pregnant when I'm breastfeeding. And then I started getting a sore breast, and I thought that the galactocele, the cyst that I'd had previously, was coming back. And so I really freaked out and booked in to see the breast surgeon who had helped me through that in the past. And I was having night sweats, and remember telling my husband, I really don't think you do. And I said, no, I've got this lump in my breast. I'm having night sweats. All of the stuff, when I Google it, it tells me that I have cancer. And he was like, babe, can you go and take a pregnancy test? Because that's all the same symptoms you get when you're pregnant. And so I went and took a pregnancy test, and lo and behold, I was pregnant, even though I thought that I wouldn't be able to be. And yeah, by that point, I was already 8 weeks. So I gave my midwife a call and said, I know it's a little bit late, but can you fit me in? And of course she did. And yeah, we just continued with that pregnancy, and it was really beautiful. It was quite hard towards the end. I didn't have as much anxiety with this pregnancy as I did with the others, because I was a fair bit into the pregnancy by the time that I found out I was pregnant. But also I had like this, we were wondering whether I was pregnant with twins actually, because I had a huge bloating type cyst in my, where your uterus would be. And I was like, oh, I'm only 9 weeks and my uterus can't possibly be that big yet unless I'm carrying twins. And so we were, discussing with Jo what it could be. And she said, look, you should probably go and get a scan just to see. And if you're comfortable doing that, like go and do it now. And just, then we can make decisions around what sort of care you're going to have. And when I went and got the scan, it was actually an ovarian cyst that had blown up. It was huge and was just sort of traveling around my abdomen for some unknown reason. It's very rare. The same as a galactocele is very rare, and a placental abruption is very rare.
Trifecta there, haven't you?
Oh, yes. I just like to, throw spanners in the works. But yeah, so I went and had that scan, and, baby was beautifully healthy, and the cyst ended up not causing any more troubles after that. They drained it, and then it went away. actually it shouldn't have been drained. You shouldn't drain ovarian cysts, but that's what they did.
Oh.
Because they weren't sure what it was and they needed to check that it wasn't cancerous. Sorry, I'm just going to go and grab a drink.
Sure.
Still going, I just need a drink. All right, sorry about that.
Right.
Yeah, and so then so we got to see Bub. Everything was all right with her, and you know, we didn't know she was a girl at that point, but I felt that she was. And we we then just continued on with the pregnancy as you do, and everything was beautifully well. The cyst went down, she grew perfectly. I had a scan at 20 weeks and everything was great. I didn't really have any other testing. Like I test my own blood sugar levels instead of having the glucose tolerance tests or anything like that. And I choose to decline the group B strep swab, and you know, I don't do any of those sorts of tests because I just feel that with that information, it wouldn't necessarily change the way that I was, you know, proceeding with the pregnancy. I eat a healthy diet. I'm already doing everything I can to keep my insulin levels, you know, or my blood sugar levels under control. And with group B strep, I made a very conscious decision that the benefits of having the swab, and you know, if I did have a diagnosis of group B strep, they were outweighed by the risks of a false positive and then being treated like I needed to have antibiotics throughout labor and all of that sort of stuff. So so I declined those tests and had them.
And they don't even test for that in Queensland anymore either.
No.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how with coronavirus, you know, you don't need to have the glucose tolerance tests anymore.
Yeah, I heard that. Yeah.
It's just ludicrous that they just take these away.
Because some of these tests can be the outcome of a woman having a cesarean or being induced. Like literally getting a result can cause, you know, you have to be induced. Let's do a cesarean now. You need to have this, you need to have that, which can really alter the course of how a baby's born from that diagnosis. But yeah, it's really interesting.
Ludicrous that you know, something derails the potential experiences you have. And you know, after reading that book, Gentle Birth, Gentle Mothering, I've always used the BRAIN acronym. So, you know, I look at the benefits, the risks, the alternatives, what I intuitively feel, and what will happen if I do absolutely nothing. Yeah. And then I make a decision based on that. And so each of my decisions throughout my pregnancy about, you know, each of the different tests I would have, I always used that acronym and made a very, you know, informed and conscious decision about what I was doing. And I also, you know, I never chose to have a nuchal translucency scan. The reasoning behind that was just that if I did come back with a high risk of my baby having a chromosomal abnormality, Down syndrome, for example, I wouldn't actually change the way that I was proceeding with the pregnancy. And so I just, if the result isn't going to make any difference to the way that I continue with my pregnancy, then I choose not to have it.
And it's so good to hear that your midwife was supportive of, you know, your choices and what you wanted to do. And also so hands off in the birth. You know, it was always, is it okay if I do this? Can I do this? You know?
Absolutely. And, you know, if I had said no, she would have backed off entirely. Like it was just, you know, everything was my decision, and I felt so empowered and capable of making those decisions and respected and supported in them as well. And, you know, even if that decision wasn't something that she would have decided for herself, she could understand why I wanted to do that. And because she's a very woman-centered midwife, she just went with what I wanted. And, you know, I'm so grateful for that. So, yeah, she's a true gem of a midwife, that one.
Yes.
I know, and you know, it's really important to get a midwife like that and understand what kind of midwife you're going with. I know we're going off on a tangent here. We're not talking about your birth.
Yeah, no, that's totally fine.
It is. It's so important to find the right midwife for you as well.
Absolutely. I think that the main thing that I say to women when I'm speaking with them in early pregnancy now, regardless of whether I'm their doula or, you know, just speaking to them as a friend or whatever, is make sure that you find a care provider that aligns with the birth you want. Because if you're employing, for example, some women will employ an obstetrician and they want a completely hands-off natural birth. And the reality is that obstetricians are very, very good at surgical births when there are medical complications and things need to be done. But if you want a natural hands-off physiological birth, go and employ a midwife, because they're the specialists in that. And they really do know how to sit on their hands and just allow it all to unfold. Or at least private midwives tend to be, you know, the gold standard in that. They're very, very consistent and capable of picking up when things are going amiss and transferring if that's necessary. But they're also beautifully capable of just leaving it alone as long as it's well. And so, yeah, I think that makes a huge difference to not only the way that your birth progresses and you know, the kind of care that you have during your pregnancy, but also, you know, how your birth unfolds and whether you feel respected and supported through the choices that you make. Yeah. So
100% agree. Yep.
Yeah, it makes such a big difference. Yeah, so she was amazing, and yeah, I forgot where I got up to. So
well,
I was pregnant.
We were talking about tests.
Oh, yes.
So you got the 20-week scan, and then
yeah, and then I didn't have any more testing, and everything was beautiful. My midwife just checked on us, you know, as they do throughout the rest of the pregnancy. The kids were able to be really well involved with, you know, checking on baby and measuring my tummy, and it was all just really beautiful. And that's something that I think I really adore about home birth, is that, you know, my whole family could be incredibly involved in the pregnancy and all of the appointments and the process. And we had the same midwife and we were all comfortable with her and we all knew her on a very first name basis. And it was just, it's just lovely to have that continuity of care, not just through one pregnancy, but all of them. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we developed a really special relationship with her, and it's a very precious opportunity to have that care throughout all of our baby making days, which has been just such a blessing. And so yeah, we ended up, we got to 40 weeks. I was starting to get really uncomfortable towards the end of the pregnancy, and part of the reason was that when I had been pushing Hamish out so gangbusters, mm-hmm. I had not only given myself a second degree tear, but I had also managed to rip the pelvic floor off the pubic bone on one side. And so because of that, I had sustained, I had a mild prolapse. That was all sort of picked up within sort of 6 months of Hamish being born. I realised that stuff just wasn't right and it all felt too heavy. Mm-hmm. I felt like my vagina was falling out basically, and felt swollen and heavy. And I went and saw a women's health physio, and she checked me out, and we did all these different exercises and things to try to rectify it, and none of them were working. And so I went to see a urogynecologist. He checked it and confirmed that the pelvic floor had been pulled from the bone. But he also said to me, you've done so much damage now that you might as well just have the rest of your babies vaginally anyway. And I remember in some ways thinking how that could be considered a positive, but man, that language is horrific. Like, oh, you've already destroyed your body. Why not? Like, just keep going, you know? Yeah,
not helpful.
No, it was very rude. Anyway, that's the story in and of itself, really. But yeah, so I started getting quite uncomfortable towards the end of Everly's pregnancy, and was very swollen and just not not as comfy as I had been with Hamish or with Willow. And I remember just being like, oh, I want this baby to come. And I had finally experienced that, antsiness of just come out now. I had never had that before, but I was like, just be born already. And I was super excited for the labor. I'd gotten a birth pool this time, had set up a separate labor space. I'd hired a birth photographer. Like, I was super excited because with Hamish's labor, I really didn't think that he would come out of my vagina until he did. And then I was really sad that I didn't have any documentation of that happening. I had some photos that my doula had taken and a video of him actually being born, but it wasn't, like, I really wanted to have something that I could look back on and really treasure and love. And so, I decided to hire a birth photographer. And we ended up having our, I got to 40 weeks and then 40 weeks plus one, and I was getting really annoyed. And then I said to my midwife, she was like, well, when do you think Bub will come? And I remember looking at the calendar and saying, well, the kids are all born on the days of numbers that we like. So my husband likes 13 and my son is born on the 13th of November. And I really like the number 7, and my daughter is born on the 7th of August. And I like the number 3. And I was like, I reckon she'll come on the 3rd of July. We'll just see what happens. And it just happens that it coincided with a new moon. And so the full moon energy was strong, and, everything was as it should have been. And the night before, I remember saying to my husband, oh, I'm just going to go to bed early. Like, I don't know whether anything's going to happen. I'm hopeful it will, but I doubt it will. And then, so I went to bed, and then I woke up at around 3:00 in the morning with contractions. And, at first they weren't too full on, and I was like, oh, it's fine. I'll just stay in bed. But then I decided to get up, and I had done some hypnobirthing, sort of practice, I suppose, with some hypnobirthing tracks. And so I was listening to that, and I took a photo of my belly, the last one that I was ever going to take. And then I went and got back into bed and listened to the tracks, and I was sort of leaning over some pillows and groaning through them. My husband woke up and looked at me, and he's like, what are you doing? And I said, oh, I'm just having contractions. And he was like, oh, okay. And laid back down and went back to sleep. And I remember thinking, well, you're entirely useless. So I just got up and went into my birth space and hung out in there for a little bit. And around 5:00, I realized, oh, this actually isn't letting up. So I messaged my doula and my midwife and my birth photographer, and I knew that they wouldn't be up, or at least I expected they wouldn't be up. But my photographer messaged back almost instantly. She's got a young baby as well. And she said, have you spoken to Jo, your midwife? And I was like, oh, yeah, I've just messaged her, but I haven't called her or anything. And she said, how frequent are they? And I said, oh, every 5 minutes. She was like, maybe you should call her. And I was like, no, it's not happening yet. It's fine. And I totally expected that at the end of, once the sun came up and the kids got up, that everything would slow down anyway. So I ended up saying to my husband, like, I'm just going to go about our day as normal. I had a chiropractic appointment. So I went to that appointment, and when we were on the way there, like, I remember ringing ahead and saying, oh, I'm in labor, but it's not cracking labor yet or anything. They're 5 minutes apart. Is he still okay to adjust me? And the receptionist was like, why on earth would you want to come here when you're in labor? And I was like, oh, because I just need to, like, I just wanted to make sure everything was aligned. I hadn't been for 4 weeks, anyway, so we went. And my chiropractor's wife actually has had home births herself. So he was really comfortable with it all. And he wasn't a stranger to seeing a woman in labor. And he adjusted me, and everything was lovely. And I said, oh, we'll walk around for a little bit afterwards just so that, you know, I'm not sitting straight back in a car and ruining all of his hard work. So we walked around for a bit, and suddenly the contractions were every 2 or 3 minutes apart. So I was like, okay, we're going to go home. And it took us a good 25 minutes to drive the 10 minutes home, because every time I got a contraction, I had to get out and sway on the side of the road and moan. And I remember looking up at my husband and him saying, why are we on the side of the road when you were planning a home birth? Like, why did we leave home? Anyway, so we eventually got home, and I rang my midwife and said that, you know, it might be ramping up a bit. And she listened to me through some contractions and was like, yeah, I'm going to come. Are you happy for me to ring Jerusha, your photographer? And I said, yes, please. And so she rang her, and my husband rang our doula, Jackie. And so soon enough, like, the whole birth team was there, and they got there. So my midwife and my student midwife, Tash, they got there at 11 past 11. And I had, throughout my pregnancy, I kept getting these repetitive numbers. So it was like 3:33 and then 4:44 and then 5:55 every time I looked at the clock when I was having contractions that morning. And then they stepped through the door at 11:11. And because I had commented to Jo that, you know, I keep seeing all of these numbers repeated, she said to me, did you know it's 11:11? And I was like, oh, no, I didn't actually. But it was nice to see her, and she checked on me and Barb and was happy to stay. And I said, you know, it's not happening. You should just go for coffee or something. And I just felt like it was going to go forever. I didn't feel like it was regular enough. And I was getting really frustrated by this stage, actually, that, you know, why isn't it picking up? Like, I'm really actually very annoyed at this. Why isn't this baby bloody well coming?
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. Anyway, so, yeah, I was just getting very grumpy about it and said, I'm just going to lock myself in this room and I'll pace up and down, and you just stay out there. And she was like, okay, that's fine. And so I just went about my business in the room and had a good cry and got grumpy, and then ended up getting in the pool. And soon enough, we ended up, you know, it started to pick up a bit. My photographer and doula arrived, and they were greeted at the door by my dog barking insistently at them. He sort of rounded them up, even though he knew them. And yeah, so that was, you know, signified that they were there. And then, yeah, the labour just kept on going. And after a while, I remember just I was so angry. I was like, this just isn't happening. Oh, my baby is awake. I'm just going to go and put her on the boob while I talk to you.
Oh, no problems.
Evie, do you want some milk? Oh, darling. Sorry, Ashley.
All right.
Sorry, I should have left the I know, you woke up. It's all right. Here you go. Here you go. Well done. Yeah, so yeah, I had the poops, and, you know, this just wasn't going fast enough. And I remember getting out and in of the pool and just like, it's just not happening. And at some point, I really, like, I felt like I was in transition, and I could started slipping out of control for me, because I was so in my head. And I was just saying to myself, like, I'd watched women give birth at this point, which for my previous labours, or my previous labour, I had seen one woman give birth, my friend, but I hadn't been there in a doula capacity. I really didn't know a great deal about, you know, the different stages of labour or what it looked like or sounded like. Whereas with this labour, I knew very well. I'd been supporting women for a couple of years now. And so I knew that oh, I'm saying these things. And that's what normally happens when a woman is going into transition. And I was just analysing every little bit so much. And yeah, I couldn't get out of my head. And it was a huge issue for me, actually. And so I remember Jerusha, my photographer, sitting next to me and saying, you know, because as we were going through the contractions, I would just scream out, no, no, no. I didn't want any more of them. I was like, just get this baby out. And she said to me, let's change it to a yes. And I remember her sitting there holding my hand, and she was like, we're just going to do this one. And she was massaging and talking. And I really loved that so much. I was just so grateful that she brought me back out of that really negative headspace, back to, just say yes. Even if you're not feeling it, just say yes instead for now. And we'll see if it changes things. And it really did. It really brought me back into a mode where I was like, okay, I can keep going. But it just, it was a hard slog, and it just kept going and kept on going. And then eventually I said to Joe, look, I haven't weed since this morning. Like I haven't gone to the toilet since like 9 a.m. And it was at that point, it was like 3 p.m. So I was like, it's not really normal that I haven't gone to the bathroom in that time, especially since I've been drinking lots of water. And so again, very much in my head, I said to her, I want you to do a catheter and see if anything comes out. Like I'm wondering whether my bladder is holding the baby up. And she was like, well, you know, I don't feel like we need to do that. And I was like, no, I want you to. Mm-hmm. And so she said, okay, well, if you want, I can do that and we can see what happens. So they did that. And nothing came out, presumably because I didn't have anything there because I was sweating so much in the pool and, you know, in and out. And so, nothing came of that. And then I remember saying to her, look, can you just break my waters then? Like, this has to end. I can't do it anymore. I had been in that transitional headspace at this point for 2 hours. And for me, that was just like so exhausting because my previous transition was 5 minutes. I had just had 5 minutes and I'd been able to relax into it and let go. But this time I just felt like I was fighting every contraction and just could not get out of that headspace. And she said to me, look, let's have another couple of contractions. See if you can go and sit on the toilet and push. See if you can get the waters to burst yourself. Like you might be able to get it happening yourself. Feel inside, see if you can feel anything. And so I went and did that and nothing came. And I ended up saying to her, look, I really want you to break my waters. Like, can you just do it, please? And she was like, look, if that's what you want, I'll do it. So she did. And stuff just shifted into a whole different gear after that. And so I felt like, you know, it was finally happening. When she broke my waters, she checked and I was around 8 centimeters. And so we just kept going. I stayed out of the pool for a little bit to see if we could keep labor, you know, progressing well, because prior to my waters being broken, the contractions were really starting to space out to like every 5 minutes, every 7 minutes. Like it was just, my body was sort of just wanting to have a rest. And I had done that for like half an hour, then an hour, and it still wasn't doing anything. So yeah, having the waters broken, it kicked it into a new gear. And so I just kept contracting on the lounge instead. I didn't get back in the pool because I still had the catheter in at this point as well. And then all of a sudden I was like, you've got to take the catheter out. Like, just get it out. I can't deal with this anymore. And when she did that, I said, can you check again? Because this was maybe 15 minutes after she'd broken my waters. I was like, can you check again? Because I'm having all of these contractions. And, you know, it was feeling like I wanted to push. And previously I just went ahead and did that. But this time it felt a little bit different. Like when I was pushing, there was more resistance there. And I also wanted to be sure that I wasn't going to exacerbate the prolapse that I already had by pushing when, you know, my body wasn't necessarily ready. And so I asked her to do a VE, and she checked, and I was almost fully dilated. I just had a tiny cervical lip, so a tiny bit of cervix left over Bub's head. And I was like, all right. And she said, you know what this means, that we should probably do the horse lips bum in the air thing. And I was like, yeah. And she's like, okay, so let's do that for a bit. And so I did that for 2 contractions. And I remember bargaining with her and saying, what did I say? She said, can you give me 3 or 5? It was 5 contractions like that before I check again. Because I had 1 contraction and said, check again, is it moved? And she said, can you give me 5 like this? And then I'll check. And I had 3, and I was like, all right, I need you to check again. And she checked again, and she's like, it's still there, love. Can you do a little bit more? And I said, can't you just push it? I've seen midwives just push it before. Can't you just try? And she said, why don't you give it a go, and you can try and push it over your baby's head. And I tried, and that didn't work anyway. So then I was like, fine, I'll just keep going with my bum in the air, and I'm doing horse lips. And I was in a totally different realm at this point. Like I was like, I can't do this anymore, but I'm going to have to, the baby's coming. And then all of a sudden, I remember it shifting gear, and it just felt like, oh, okay, the baby has dropped and I need to get in the pool. Like, I'm not going to be able to stop myself from pushing anymore. This is like, it is go time. And I remember looking at my midwife, and I don't know how this actually went down, because my husband tells me that actually my midwife said to me, would you like to get in the pool? But in my mind, I actually said to her, I'm getting in the pool. And so I did that, got in the pool, and in the next contraction, I pushed my baby's head out, and she just came all the way out beautifully. I was holding her. So in that next contraction, I didn't actually push per se, my body did. I just breathed, and I had done a lot of sort of practicing breathing while exercising and stuff to try to get my headspace into this, I'm not going to push my baby out like I did last time, because I didn't want to damage myself any more than I already had. But also I really just didn't want to tear. That was I wanted this time to, that was the goal, not to end up with a tear. And I also wanted to catch my own baby, lift her to my chest myself. And so I remember as she started coming down, I put my hand down and felt my perineum and could feel it stretching, and that feedback was amazing. Like, oh, okay, like I'm stretching really well, and this is working really well. And I just kept feeling that. And as my midwife ended up saying to me, because I at this point had just gotten back into the pool, so she had watched me, like I was head down, bum up, doing horse lips, and then all of a sudden I'd gotten into the pool because I felt like I needed to really push, and she said to me, is that baby's head, love? And I was like, yep. And then she said, okay, Roo, and called Jerusha, because I don't think anyone was expecting the baby to come quite that quickly after I moved to the pool. And so, so her head came out in that one contraction, and it was just beautiful and slow. I just breathed through it, and her whole head came out. And then there was a bit of a pause. And then in the next contraction, it was like the puniest, strangest contraction. And it was like that pause was only like a matter of seconds. It wasn't like, 30 seconds or a minute of waiting, or like a couple of minutes of waiting like it had been with Hamish, where his head was out and I just had to birth the shoulders. This was all sort of within the space of one contraction that her head came, and there was a bit of a pause as she rotated, and then all of a sudden it was like she swam out. Like I could feel her rotate and move and come out into my hands. And I pulled her up to my chest and was just so enamored and elated that, oh, my baby's finally here. And I was finally holding this little being that before this I'd connected with her while I was pregnant, but I could finally see her and you know, she was a girl and just as I had expected, and she looked just like her sister, and it was just incredible. And having the kids there and so excited and happy. And so Evie, when she was born, she had really good color and tone, but I think because she was born so quickly, like just one contraction really from being inside to being entirely outside, she was quite shocked. And so it took her a while again to come good. And so she did what I've now termed the sing baby thing and went all floppy. And my midwife did end up giving her some suction and some bagged air. Of course, she asked me if that was okay. And I approved of that and said that was fine. And so she did that. And I was feeling Everly's cord, and I could feel that was pulsing, and I could feel her heart beating. So I knew that, you know, she was going to be okay. And there's this picture series that my photographer took, which is just gorgeous. You can see the whole process of my baby being given the bagged air and everything. And actually, I wasn't at all concerned. Like I really felt like she was going to be totally fine. And my midwife had this; she was all over it. Everything was going to be perfect. And yeah, within a minute or so, she came beautifully good and was screaming and looking up at us, and nice and pink and healthy and kicking around, and I put her on the breast and gave her some boob, and then the other aspect that I did really want for this birth was to birth the placenta in the pool. That was what, you know, I hadn't managed to do that with Hamish because I had bled a bit, and you know, with my history, of course, it was we just want to know that everything's okay. But yeah, this time again, I just bled a lot, and I ended up saying to my midwife, "You want me to get out of the pool?" And she was like, "Yeah, if you're happy to, that would be really good." And so I jumped out and, you know, sat on a bluey, and we ended up, I think it was about maybe half an hour, 20 minutes. I gave a bit of a push and it wasn't quite coming. So Joe gave a little bit of gentle cord traction and out the placenta came. And yeah, we tied Everly's cord instead of doing the cord burning ceremony this time, just because, you know, I didn't want to have the same situation as last time where it didn't quite seal perfectly. So yeah, we tied and cut it. My daughter Willow cut the cord, and during my labour, Willow and Hamish had been baking cakes with my doula Jackie, and so they had made and decorated this beautiful cake, and they brought it out, and we sang happy birthday to the baby. And yeah, it was just such a beautiful experience, and very different to my second labour and birth, which I found to be really quite easy and blissful and surprisingly easy. Like I got to the end of that labour and remember saying to Joe, "Wow, I could do that again. Like that was so much easier than I thought it would be." But then perhaps that gave me false expectations for my next labour and birth, or maybe it was just because I was so in my head, or maybe it was because she was in a different position.
Yeah, it sounds like you had a different position with that one, with the cervical lip, just from what I've heard, which can make for a longer labour. And I think your analytical brain got in the way, because that's the last thing we need to be doing, isn't it? Getting into thinking about this, and we should do this, and I should push the lip out of the way, and maybe it's a bladder problem. And I've heard this from doulas before who have attended so many births, and then they kind of freak themselves out over their birth.
Yes.
It could be this, it could be that. And so it's interesting that happened to you, but not surprising.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've spoken to some doulas before and since as well, and midwives too, actually, that have done exactly the same thing. Like they end up stuck in that transitional space, because until you really relax into it and just let go, like your body can't keep going. So you're just stuck in that space. And then when you do finally, I remember the moment where I went, "Oh, this is just never going to bloody end." And I just gave up. Like I gave up on analysing it, I suppose. And suddenly it shifted. So yeah, I think it is a really tough thing to get out of that headspace once you're in it. And I definitely struggled with it. But her birth was absolutely beautiful in its own way. And, you know, even though I had the interventions that I never would have thought I would have agreed to have, let alone sort of begged for, I'm really proud of how well we did as a team, you know, our whole birth team, but also just me and baby. Like, it's such an incredible experience to be able to bring your baby earthside like that. And she's now a beautiful bouncing 10-month-old, crawling everywhere, and is very much doted upon by our whole family. We're very grateful she came to join us.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing your stories, all three of them. And, you know, each one is so, you know, uniquely beautiful and different in their own way.
Thank you.
But your journey is so wonderful as well. And you have so much, you know, so many people are going to hear from this journey and be able to relate, and also understand that they have options, they have choices. There's so many more choices and options available that, you know, so many women are not even aware of. So thanks for leading by example and sharing your story.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. And yeah, I think if there's one thing that I could tell every pregnant woman, it's, you know, just make sure that whatever care provider you are going with, if you are going with a care provider, that they're aligned with what you want for your birth. And unfortunately, in the current climate in Australia, at least, we really aren't supported to pursue the births that we desire. Like, our system is very much funneling women into hospitals, and so, you know, to move against that mainstream and actually say, you know, I'm taking control of this and this is what I want, and to seek out a midwife, and, you know, to be able to afford a midwife as well in our current maternity system is quite hard for many women. So I think, you know, I wish everybody all the best in making those decisions, and I hope that every woman can find a care provider that aligns with them as beautifully as I did with mine, and that they all feel supported and empowered in bringing their babies to this earth.
Beautifully said. I couldn't wish for anything more either. It's what every woman deserves, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Aimee, for coming on again. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ashley. It's been so lovely, and I hope you have a lovely afternoon. And well done with the podcast. I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah, this is taking off. It's going to be so wonderful to listen to. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the VBAC Homebirth Stories podcast. I hope that this episode has helped you take another step to finding your voice and confidence in your VBAC journey. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a second to rate and review. Each review helps us to help more women to find out more about VBAC homebirth, just like you. Don't forget to take a screenshot, share it to your Instagram stories, and tag me at the Motherhood Circle. See you next week. Hey, me again. I just wanted to let you know that I've just created a brand new Facebook group called VBAC Homebirth Support Group, where you can connect with other like-minded mothers who are looking to have a VBAC homebirth as well. You can find the link in the show notes, and I look forward to seeing you there.